A husband and wife at a kitchen table in a small town somewhere in Iowa or Pennsylvania or upstate New York have been looking at the same book for 3 nights in a row. The book is the Sears Roebuck Catalog. It is 1,400 pages thick. It arrives by mail twice a year, free to 20 million American households, and it sells everything from telephones to phonographs to women's stockings to kitchen ranges. Tonight, the catalog is open to page 594. Page 594 is where the catalog begins to sell houses. A 4-color illustration shows a 1.5-story bungalow with tapered porch columns and a deep front porch. The text below names the model, the Valonia, and prints the price. $1,980 complete. 25% down. 60 months to pay. The blueprints, the lumber, the trim, the windows, the roofing, the door hardware, all of it shipped by rail in 2 boxcars to the freight depot of the buyer's choosing. The husband looks at the wife looks at the catalog. A house has just become a thing they can choose from a list in the same way they choose a stove. This was, in the United States in the 1920s, a new way to buy a house. For 32 years, between 1908 and 1940, the Sears Roebuck Company sold somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 of these houses by mail order in over 370 distinct models. Most of them are still standing. The brand that delivered them, in its original form, is almost entirely gone. The first thing to understand about a Sears Modern Home, the formal name of the program, is how completely the catalog had rationalized the building of a house. Between 1908 and 1940, the Sears Roebuck Company sold somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 kit houses across the United States and into Canada and Alaska in more than 370 distinct models, ranging in price from about $360 for a small frontier-style cottage to over $5,000 for a model called the Magnolia, a 2-story colonial revival mansion with a monumental columned portico and 3 full bathrooms. The kits were shipped, in most cases, by rail in 2 boxcars per house, sometimes 3. By the late 1920s, Sears had also begun shipping kits by truck within 35 miles of its 3 production plants in Cairo, Illinois, Norwood, Ohio, and Port Newark, New Jersey. A handful of kits, sourced from Cairo, traveled by barge down the Ohio River and up the Mississippi. The kit, when it arrived at a customer's lot, came in a quantity that startled people: 25 tons of material, 30,000 parts, pre-cut lumber stamped with letter and number codes that corresponded to numbered positions on the blueprint, pre-hung doors, sashed windows, the plumbing fixtures if the customer had ordered the plumbing package, the wiring if the customer had ordered the wiring package, good wall plasterboard sheets, an early Sears-branded form of drywall were stacked in 2-by-8-foot rectangles in their own crate. Roofing was bundled, trim was banded. The instructions ran to 75 pages. What Sears was selling, in other words, was not a building. It was a catalog of decisions that the customer had already made. Choose a model from the Modern Homes book. Mail in the order form. Send the down payment, usually around 25% of the price, to the Modern Homes department at the company's headquarters on West Arthington Street in Chicago. Receive, by return mail, a confirmation, the blueprints, and a freight schedule. Wait, depending on backlog, anywhere from 6 weeks to 4 months. Receive a telegram from the local rail agent that the boxcars have arrived. Hire a team or assemble one from neighbors or both. Build a house in approximately 90 days, working evenings and weekends. The catalog promised that a man of average abilities, with the help of 1 or 2 friends, could complete the structure in a single summer. The promise was real. The promise was also incomplete. Foundation work, masonry, plastering of certain interior surfaces, plumbing connections, and electrical hookups generally required licensed local trades, and these costs were not in the kit price. Freight charges, also borne by the customer, could run $300 to $700 depending on distance from a Sears mill. Land had to be purchased separately. Sears, after 1911, did offer mortgages, and that is the part of the story that will turn at the end of the 1920s into the dark center of it. But for 32 years, between the first Modern Homes catalog of 1908 and the last one in 1940, the company had industrialized the American single-family home. The house was a product. By 1908, the year the first Modern Homes catalog was issued, the Sears, Roebuck and Company had already been selling almost everything else in American life by mail for 2 decades. The big book, the general catalog, ran to over 1,400 pages. It contained tools, clothing, furniture, kitchen equipment, sewing machines, organs, firearms, prefabricated barns, and tombstones. It was distributed by the millions. In rural America, in the 1890s and early 1900s, the Sears catalog functioned as a kind of unofficial second department store, accessible to families who lived 20 miles from the nearest town and who could not, on any reasonable timetable, drive a wagon to a city to shop. What made the Kit House possible, beyond the catalog itself, was 3 pieces of infrastructure that had matured at the same time. The first was the railroad. By 1900, the United States had laid roughly 200,000 miles of track. The freight rates on bulk lumber and finished hardware had fallen by an order of magnitude over the previous 30 years. A boxcar of pre-cut framing lumber from Cairo, Illinois, could reach a small-town freight depot in northern Pennsylvania in 5 days for a freight charge of around $200. The same shipment, in 1875, would have been functionally impossible. The second was balloon framing. The traditional American house before the 1880s was built of heavy timber, posts and beams 6 and 8 inches square, mortised and tenoned together by a master carpenter. A house took most of a year. A balloon-framed house used standard 2x4 and 2x8 softwood lumber, milled to identical dimensions, joined with steel nails. A stud wall could be assembled flat on the ground in an hour by 2 men with a hammer. The house could be erected, sheathed, and roofed in a few weeks. The third was the manufacture of asphalt shingles. The Sears Modern Homes program coincided with the rise of asphalt shingle roofing as a cheap, fire-resistant, lightweight material that could be bundled and shipped without breaking. A roof of cedar shake in 1900 weighed 3 times what an asphalt shingle roof weighed and required twice the labor. Add to these 3 innovations a fourth, which was Sears itself. The company had bought, by 1916, a lumber and millwork plant in Cairo, Illinois, a sash and door plant called Norwood Sash and Door in Ohio, and a large lumber yard in Port Newark, New Jersey. From these 3 production sites, the company controlled the entire supply chain. It bought softwood lumber by the trainload from Pacific Northwest and Southern timber operations. It pre-cut every framing member at the mill. It stamped the cut pieces with their letter codes. It packed the kit. It shipped the kit. It financed the kit when the customer asked. The Modern Homes catalog promised, in its 1916 edition, a savings of 40% in cutting labor over a traditionally framed house and a savings of around 30% in total construction cost. Both numbers, by the standards of independent 20th century housing surveys, were defensible. The catalog itself was the showroom. Each model had a name: the Wesley, the Valonia, the Magnolia, the Avalon, the Crescent, and a 4-color illustration of the front elevation in its idealized version. Trim painted, lawn manicured, wife on the porch with the child, husband walking up the path. The plans showed the floor layout. The text described what was included and what was not. The price was prominent. By 1929, the Modern Homes catalog ran to over 100 pages, and the houses on offer ranged from a 1-room hunting cabin to a 3,000-square-foot colonial revival. Imagine a kitchen table in a small house in Iowa or Pennsylvania or upstate New York in 1923. The catalog is open between the husband and the wife. They have looked at it for 3 weeks. They have circled 4 models. They have crossed out 2. The remaining choice between the Valonia and the Crescent is going to be made tonight. The price is on the page, the mortgage is offered on the page, the down payment, the term, the interest rate are listed in the back. The house is, in this moment, the same kind of decision as a sewing machine. A thing they are choosing from a list of things, made by a company they have heard of, paid for in installments they understand. This was, in 1923, a new way to buy a house. Return to Carlinville, Illinois, in the spring of 1918. The Standard Oil Company of Indiana, through its coal mining subsidiary, the Superior Coal Company, operates 4 mines in Macoupin County. The mines feed coal to the company's refinery operations and to the railroads. The mines need miners. The miners need housing. The existing housing in Carlinville, a town of about 4,000 residents, is fully occupied. The company has decided, in the spring of 1918, to build new housing for its workforce. The decision is to bulk order the housing from the Sears Modern Homes Department. The order is for 149 houses, 8 different Sears models, repeated across 12 city blocks, on graded streets that the company will lay out and pave on a piece of farmland it has bought at the southeast edge of Carlinville. Each house will sit on a lot of about 40 by 120 feet. Each house will have a basement, a coal-fired furnace, indoor plumbing, electric wiring. The company will sell the houses to the miners on an installment plan, with the monthly payments deducted from the workers' wages. The check the company writes to Sears in mid-1918 is reportedly close to $1 million. It is, at the time, the largest single payment Sears Roebuck has received for any one transaction in the history of the Modern Homes program. Picture the freight yard at Carlinville in the summer of 1918 and 1919. Sealed boxcars arriving in pairs, sometimes 3 pairs in a week. A staging area marked off with chalk lines on the ground. Each kit unloaded into its assigned grid square, with the lot number painted on a wooden stake. A team of carpenters, hired by the Superior Coal Company from St. Louis and Springfield, working in shifts. 2 houses going up at the same time on adjacent lots. The framing crews fanning out across the new neighborhood, the plumbing and electrical crews coming behind them. A house complete on average every 10 days. By the spring of 1920, all 149 houses are standing. The neighborhood becomes known as the Standard Edition. The houses are, from the outside, immediately identifiable as catalog homes. 8 models, repeating up and down the streets. The Carlin, the Avoca, the Olivia, the Roseberry, and a few others. Identical in framing, varied in their porch treatments and their paint colors, so that each block does not read as exactly identical. The miners and their families move in over the course of 1919 and 1920. By 1922, the Standard Edition is an established neighborhood. It has its own grocery, its own elementary school. It has, by the standards of any worker housing of its era, an exceptionally high quality of finish. Hardwood floors, plastered walls, indoor bathrooms, central heat. A miner working a 60-hour week in 1922 could come home from the pit, sit on his own porch, on his own lot, in his own 1,200-square-foot house with his own family. The arrangement was not free. The deductions came out of his paycheck for the next 10 or 15 years, but the house was his name on the ACO deed. Carlinville's Standard Edition is the largest concentration of Sears Modern Homes ever assembled in one place. It is not the only one. Smaller corporate orders followed. DuPont, Pullman, several smaller manufacturing concerns, all of them using Sears kits to build company workforce housing in single bulk orders. None of them on Carlinville's scale. The Carlinville order is the moment the kit house, which had been a household consumer product, briefly became an industrial commodity. The same boxcar that delivered one family's house could, on a multiplied order, deliver a neighborhood. Most kit houses, however, were not bulk ordered by employers. Most kit houses were ordered by individual families, and most were assembled by the families themselves with help from neighbors and a hired contractor or two. The catalog promised 90 days. The truth was that 90 days was the minimum. A typical owner-built kit in the 1920s took 4 to 6 months to complete, with the family living in a rented apartment or with relatives until the house was closed in. The order arrives. The husband, the brother-in-law, 2 neighbors, and a hired carpenter are at the lot at 6 in the morning. The first task is to read the instructions. The 75-page booklet that came with the kit is opened on the hood of a truck. The crew studies the foundation plan. They check the foundation against the plan. The foundation is right. The first day of work is mostly inventory, counting pieces, organizing the lumber by labeled stack, finding the pre-cut sill plates that match the foundation perimeter. By day 2, the sill plates are bolted down. By day 5, the first floor framing is up. By day 12, the second floor framing is up. By day 20, the roof is on, the house is closed in, and the work moves indoors. The labor is the missing variable in the catalog price. Sears advertised that the lumber and finishes for a typical bungalow could be had for $1,500 in 1925. What Sears did not advertise was that the freight might add $300. The foundation, poured by a local contractor, might add $400. The plumbing connections to the municipal water and sewer, where municipal water and sewer existed, might add another $200. The electrical hookup might add $150. The masonry for the chimney and the basement walls might add $200. The hired carpenter to lead the framing might run $3 a day for 10 weeks. Add it all up, and a $1,500 bungalow by the time it was a house might cost the family $3,000. The savings over a traditional contractor-built house were real. They were just smaller than the catalog suggested. What made the Sears kit appealing was not, in the end, the absolute price. It was the elimination of risk. A contractor-built house could be late. A contractor-built house could exceed budget. A contractor-built house could be poorly built by a local crew the family had no leverage against. A Sears kit was, by 1925, a known product. The pieces fit, the plans were correct, the materials were tested, the brand stood behind the kit. If a stud was missing, Sears would mail a replacement. If a window was broken in shipment, Sears would replace it. The relationship was not between a family and a contractor. The relationship was between a family and a national company, conducted by mail. This was, in 1925, a new kind of trust to extend to the largest purchase of a working family's life. Some families could not bring themselves to extend it. Most who did extend it were satisfied. Some, by 1932, were going to lose the house and the trust along with it. What a Sears kit delivered, when assembled, was a particular kind of American interior. The plans, drawn from contemporary pattern books and lightly modified by Sears's in-house design staff, were optimized for the working and lower middle-class household of the 1910s through the 1930s. On the ground floor, a living room running the full width of the front of the house behind the porch. A formal dining room behind the living room or beside it, separated by a wide doorway, sometimes with French doors. A kitchen at the rear, with direct access to the backyard or a service porch. In larger models, a small breakfast nook beside the kitchen with a built-in bench and a hanging light. A staircase, central or off the side hall, leading to the second floor. On the second floor, 2 or 3 bedrooms, often with one slightly larger primary bedroom and the others smaller, arranged around a short central hall. A single shared bathroom, tiled with a pedestal sink, a toilet, and a cast-iron bathtub. Some larger models had a second small bathroom or a sleeping porch, an enclosed semi-outdoor room used for sleeping in summer. In the basement, the coal furnace, the coal bin, the laundry tubs, a workbench, a storage area. The basement was unfinished but dry, with a concrete floor and concrete block walls. The materials were industrial modern by the standards of 1923. The framing was balloon-framed 2x4 softwood. The exterior cladding was clapboard or shingle, sometimes brick veneer for the higher-end models. The interior walls were lath and plaster on most of the early kits, switching by the late 1920s to the proprietary Goodwall plasterboard, an early form of drywall that Sears had patented in 1925. The roofing was asphalt shingle. The trim was milled at Norwood. The doors were 6-panel pine, hung on 3 brass hinges per door. The windows were double-hung, with operable sashes and copper-flashing weather stripping. The bathrooms had a particular detail that has now become a kind of forensic clue. On many Sears kits from the 1930s, the cast-iron bathtub, the toilet tank, and the sink basin all bore a small circled SR for Sears Roebuck, cast into the porcelain or the iron at the base of the fixture. The mark was about ½ inch across. Most homeowners never noticed it. Modern Sears house investigators look for it as one of the half-dozen reliable indicators that a house was a Sears kit and not a contemporary contractor-built look-alike. The interior, in other words, was middle-class American domestic life as the 1920s imagined it, efficient, modernized, branded down to the toilet tank, with the implicit promise that whatever the family needed for daily life had already been thought of and packed in the boxcar. Step out of the kitchen, through the dining room, through the living room, and onto the porch. The porch was the social face of the kit house and, on most models, ran the full width of the front. It had a low railing, 4 or 6 tapered porch columns, and a roof that was either a separate gable or an extension of the main roof. On a summer evening in Carlinville in 1925, the porches of the standard edition are full. Children are playing in the street, the cars are few and slow. The mothers are on the porches with sewing and conversation. The fathers, on shift at the mine that week, are on shift. The fathers off shift are on the porches with their wives. The grocery delivery wagon is making its way down the street. The coal truck has already come and gone. The houses, in the long evening light, look almost identical to one another, distinguishable only by the paint color and the family on the porch. The porch was where the family was visible. The porch was where the neighborhood saw whether the family was, in the language of the era, making it. Families that fell behind on payments stopped sitting on the porch. The closed-in porch with the curtain drawn was a sign. The bright porch with 2 or 3 women on it talking after dinner was a different sign. The catalog had not specified this function. The architecture had specified it. The porch was the social interface. Inside, the parlor was the formal interface. The Sears living room, by the design conventions of the period, was a presentational room. A piano, where the family could afford one, against the inside wall. An overstuffed couch on the long wall, 2 upholstered chairs flanking the fireplace, where the model included a fireplace, a coal stove or a radiator, where it did not. A floor lamp by the chair where the husband sat to read the newspaper. A radio cabinet, after about 1928 in the corner. The dining room behind it with a table that seated 6, and the door to the kitchen closed unless food was being served. The kitchen was the working room. The kitchen was for the wife. The middle-class American household in the catalog's vision was a sequence of rooms that performed different jobs in different combinations of family and visitor. The kit house, in its standardization, encoded the sequence into the architecture of 3,478 different communities across the United States. Wherever the kit house went, the same sequence of rooms went with it. The American interior of 1925, for the working class that could afford a house at all, was a Sears interior. In 1929, the Modern Homes program had its peak year. Total program revenue ran around $12.5 million. Of that, almost half, somewhere near $6 million, was carried as Sears mortgages on Sears houses. The company had been offering home mortgages since 1911 with relatively lenient underwriting. The standard terms by 1928 were 25% down, 5-year balloons, around 6% interest, with extensions available to 10 or 15 years. The company did not investigate borrowers' finances with any great rigor. The company's business model was that the kit house and the mortgage were a single product. The company sold the house with the financing built in. In October of 1929, the stock market crashed. Within 18 months, unemployment in industrial communities was running over 25%. In coal mining communities specifically, unemployment was running closer to 40%. In Carlinville, by 1932, the Superior Coal Company had reduced shifts at all 4 of its mines. Some miners were working 2 days a week. The wage deductions for the houses kept coming. The company's payment schedule did not flex. The miners who could not pay began to fall behind. What happened next is the reason the Sears Modern Homes program exists in the historical record as a story with a dark second act. The same Sears Roebuck company that had loaned the money, that had built its brand on the promise of accessible homeownership, that had sold the dream of a house in a box to 2 generations of working families, began to foreclose. By 1934, the company had foreclosed on so many of its own borrowers that it liquidated approximately $11 million in defaulted mortgages, meaning, in plain language, that it had taken back houses from approximately 3,000 families, sold the underlying paper to other lenders or to foreclosure speculators, and recovered what cash it could. The company stopped issuing new mortgages in 1933. The Modern Homes Department internally was understood to have failed. The catalog continued in modest form until 1940, but the financing engine that had made the program viable was gone. The stories that survive from this period are not in Sears's records. The company's housing files were destroyed in the 1980s in a corporate records purge that local historians have spent 40 years trying to reconstruct from external sources. What survives is in the local archives, foreclosure notices in small-town newspapers, letters from the period in family papers, court records. In Carlinville, of the original 149 houses in the Standard Edition, an undocumented number changed hands during the Depression, some through coal company-handled transfers when miners left, some through outright foreclosure. The houses themselves did not disappear. Most of them are still standing. The names on the deeds shifted. What had been, in 1919, a story about industrialized prosperity had become, by 1934, a story about industrialized loss. The same boxcar that had delivered the house had now, in effect, delivered the foreclosure. The mechanism of the dream was the mechanism of its withdrawal. The Modern Homes catalog was issued for the last time in 1940. A small number of kit houses were sold and built into 1942 when the federal government's wartime material restrictions made consumer kit housing impossible. After the war, Sears did not return to the program. The market had moved. Levittown, on Long Island, would begin construction in 1947. The post-war American suburb would be built on a different model: large tract developers, integrated land construction financing operations, FHA and VA mortgages, identical houses on identical lots assembled by company crews. The kit house, ordered in pieces by an individual family and built by hand, was an artifact of a different era. The houses, however, are still here. Drive into Carlinville today. The Standard Edition occupies the southeast quadrant of the town. The streets are paved. The trees, planted in 1919 and 1920 by the coal company along the parking strips, are now 90 years old, with trunks 2 and 3 feet thick. The houses sit on the same 40 by 120-foot lots they sat on in 1920. The original 8 Sears models can still be identified with a careful eye by the proportions of the porches, the pattern of the dormers, the original window placements. The brick veneer on the higher-end models is the same brick. The hardwood floors inside, where they have not been carpeted over, are the same flooring shipped from Cairo. Some houses have been added onto, some have been sided over with vinyl, some have been lovingly restored. The neighborhood as a whole reads as an early suburban subdivision of the 1920s, which is what it is. Across the United States, identifying surviving Sears houses has become a recognized field of amateur architectural detective work. The company's records were destroyed. Sears never published a definitive list of where its houses went. The job of finding them has fallen to volunteer researchers, neighborhood preservationists, and a network of bloggers and database maintainers. The current best estimate is that around 70,000 Sears modern homes were sold, and that perhaps 20,000 of those are still standing in identifiable condition. The rest were demolished, replaced, or modified beyond recognition. The forensic clues for the modern Sears house hunter are specific. Stamped framing lumber in the attic, bearing letter and number codes that cross-reference to known Sears blueprints. Original shipping labels on the back of trim, sometimes preserved under later layers of paint. The circled SR on the bathroom fixtures, original mortgage records in county files naming Sears Roebuck or one of its subsidiary lending entities. Plan matches against the published catalogs, which still survive in archives. A confirmed Sears identification in a community that takes such things seriously can add tens of thousands of dollars to a house's market value. In Washington, D.C., and in some Chicago suburbs, identified Sears houses now sell for premiums of 15 to 30% over comparable contemporary houses. This is the inversion that the kit house, in its original era, would not have anticipated. The mail-order house, sold in 1923 as the affordable entry into modern domestic life, has become an authenticated heritage object, marketed by realtors as historic charm and original details, priced for collectors of architectural authenticity. The same product, valued for opposite reasons by people whose grandparents would have understood the original price more clearly than the current one. The kit house, as a system, did not survive its era. The factors that made it possible: cheap rail freight, balloon framing, asphalt shingles, the catalog as a national interface, in-house mortgage financing on lenient terms, were all replaced or absorbed by the post-war system. Tract developers integrated everything Sears had pioneered into a tighter operation. The customer no longer chose from a catalog and assembled the parts. The customer bought a finished house from a builder who had bought the land, ordered the materials, hired the crews, and arranged the financing. What the kit house had briefly represented between 1908 and 1940 was a particular American moment in which the building of a single-family home was decoupled from the local building economy and recoupled to Etisa's national consumer brand. The house was, for those 32 years, a thing a family could buy from a company they had never met, in a city they had never visited, that arrived by freight to a depot they walked to, and that they assembled with their own hands. The arrangement was strange. It worked. It worked at scale. It worked for hundreds of thousands of families. It also worked, when it stopped working, in the same direction. The same machinery that delivered 70,000 houses to 70,000 families also delivered, in the early 1930s, the foreclosures that ended the program. The standard edition is still here. Most of the original 149 houses are still standing. The mines have all closed. Superior Coal Company is gone. Standard Oil of Indiana, after a series of mergers, is now part of BP. The Sears Roebuck Company, which once mailed catalogs to 20 million American homes, filed for bankruptcy in 2018 and has continued since then in a much reduced form. The catalog is gone. The brand is mostly gone. The houses are not. A miner who walked off shift in 1922 and sat on his porch on his own lot would, today, walk through neighborhoods that look almost as he left them. The trees taller, the cars different, the houses still arranged on the same blocks, with the same porches, with the same proportions on the same lots behind the same fences, where the company had told them to go. The American dream, in its industrialized 1919 version, came to Carlinville in 2 boxcars on the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy line. The houses are still on the streets where they were built. The catalog is in the library, the brand, the program, the company that did this, almost all of it has disappeared. The houses outlasted everything else.